Good morning, everyone. It is Thursday, September 21st, 2017, and this is your fun fact of the day. For today's Theology Thursdays, we're going to look at the full narrative of Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. Now, in a lot of Bibles, there's actually this little partition in the middle, verses 29 and 30, that's sectioned off with the heading, The Good Samaritan. Headings like this can be helpful, but they can also hinder too. When we try to answer the question, why did Jesus tell the Samaritan tale? Anyone beginning in verse 30 is going to miss the point of it because it was from a few verses before that Jesus was prompted to tell this tale and therefore would have his reasons behind telling it. Yes, there's absolutely a lesson about prejudice and bigotry in the tale of the Good Samaritan. Not denying that in the slightest, encouraging it completely. It's a powerful picture of compassion and mercy, no question, but that's not the reason that Jesus told it. That reason is embedded in the exchange before that verse. A dialogue that many people neglect or just flat out miss because that little subheading gets in the way. An expert in the law comes to Jesus and asks him what he must do to inherit eternal life. Jesus responds with another question, asking this expert in the law, what does the law demand? Fair enough. And he answers with the two commandments, the two great commandments for which Jesus commends him. Love the Lord with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself, the two great commandments. Jesus responds with, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. Simple enough. The lawyer, however, this expert in the law, pursues, asking for clarification. He asks Jesus, who is my neighbor? I'm supposed to love my neighbor as myself. Well, who is that? And the reason for this question, this person asking this question, is the hinge pin of this entire episode. Quite simply, if you actually look at verse 29, you can see a pretty obvious motive of this expert in the law was wishing to justify himself by what Jesus would tell him. For me, personally, I'm aware that I have kept neither of those commandments, not by the year, the month, the day, usually not even by the hour. I am crushed daily under the intolerable weight of both these obligations with no help for self-vindication. Apparently, though, the lawyer felt more confident, depending, of course, on who Jesus meant by my neighbor. Precisely who did Jesus want this teacher of the law to love as himself? And the answer is, your most despised enemy. Every day. Without faltering, without failing. Do this and you will live. Jesus was not opining on the virtues of social justice, or racial reconciliation, or brotherly love, or just being nice to your neighbors. He wasn't talking about goodness at all, but actually badness. He was talking about the impossibility of self-justification. Remember, the lawyer asked, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Let us not forget Calvinism and its very, very dim view of works-based salvation. So the fact that it's I puts yourself at the center, not Jesus, and do puts the work in place of Jesus' works. The parable of the Good Samaritan is a story about bad news. It's not as much about the Samaritan's goodness, and is a good example, as it is about our badness. Each individual human's inane, inescapable, not good stuff inside them. Badness. Our complete inability, every single human's inability to fulfill these two pretty simple and straightforward commands and justify ourselves, which should naturally lead people to Christ, who did and does and continues to fulfill those commands for everyone who believes in him. So just think about this. When you're confused and you think you do some good works and you think you've earned something, you think you deserve something, you don't even get the two most basic and most important commands right, as Jesus himself described. And this is exactly what Jesus was for. Not just to point these out, but to fulfill them for us. In other news, today is National Pecan Cookie Day. Pecan or piquant, that cookie? Time will tell. Hope you've enjoyed this fun fact of the day. See you tomorrow.